Does the Tamar of Genesis 38, the audacious Canaanite who disguised herself as a sex worker, refer to the same woman as the Tamar of 2 Samuel 13, the violated, disgraced daughter of King David? Are both of these stories, nestled right in the heart of the Bible, just cynical attempts at propaganda? Dr. Kip Davis and I are in chilling agreement. Yes, they are. But we do have some differences. So let's pull back the curtain on how this propaganda machine actually worked, and it's far more disturbing than a simple cover-up. The narrative we are given, the one carefully polished by the biblical authors, presents two distinct, tragic figures. The first Tamar, in Genesis 38, a Canaanite woman, daughter-in-law to Judah, widowed twice, left vulnerable and denied her due by Judah. She takes matters into her own hands, disguising herself as a prostitute to sleep with Judah, securing his staff, cord, and seal. When her pregnancy is revealed, Judah, in a stunning reversal, declares, "She is more righteous than I." Through her, the ancestral line of King David is secured via her son Perez, a remarkable triumph of a marginalized woman. The second Tamar, in 2 Samuel 13, King David's daughter, she is brutally raped and then immediately despised and discarded by her half-brother Amnon. Left publicly disgraced, she is sheltered by her full brother Absalom, who silently bides his time for 2 years, a period of simmering royal resentment, before exacting a bloody revenge by murdering Amnon. They are presented as two separate women, separated by centuries, but Dr. Kip Davis, in his book God's Propaganda, has done the painstaking work of demonstrating that the authors themselves left breadcrumbs for the careful reader. Kip identifies the shocking similarities between the two accounts, right down to the names. Judah's second son, Onan, bears an almost identical Hebrew name to David's firstborn Amnon. They differ only by a single letter. And it's not just them. Kip reveals a pattern. Several other corresponding names in the two accounts differ by the addition of the exact same single Hebrew letter. Dr. Kip is convinced that the account in Genesis 38 is an allegory of sorts, a veiled yet devastating critique of the Davidic monarchy, woven into the foundational fabric of the nation. He suggests the story is a mirror. It forces the reader to look at the moral depravity of the Davidic line by showing them that the line they prized so much was already tainted by the same brokenness. But I'd like to propose a different interpretation. I think that an allegory, a coded message hidden behind a similar story, is a terrible propaganda tool. Any message that risks the original reader not understanding the agenda is a message that fails. Propaganda, by its nature, needs to be clear, even when it's dishonest. So why the similarities? Why the near-identical names? I propose it's a different and far more sinister propaganda technique. It's not an allegory, it's a smokescreen. The author had to craft a better narrative than what actually happened. They couldn't deny the basic facts that were already in circulation, but they could manipulate the interpretation. By creating two similar yet distinct accounts, they could retain the undeniable facts while simultaneously controlling and manipulating the messy, inconvenient truth. Let's start with the key relationships in the 2 Samuel account. If you remember our dive into Solomon's parentage, we noticed that the author's constant emphasis on a relationship, an almost obsessive repetition, was a sign that they were trying to change the narrative. The author of 2 Samuel is relentless. Tamar is the stepsister of Amnon. She is the full sister of Absalom. They repeatedly call each other brother and sister. This overemphasis is the blinking neon sign. Tamar was not actually related to Amnon or Absalom. The author doesn't want us to know who she really was, so we are forced to peer behind the smokescreen in Genesis 38. In Genesis, look at what the author had to construct here. Tamar, a single woman in the ancient Near East, travels alone to a city far away, executes this elaborate disguise, seduces Judah, secures the evidence, and returns home. All this, and no one noticed she was gone. It's a contrived, wildly convenient cover story. Additionally, it seems odd that a sex worker would veil her face while trying to drum up business. The whole story strains credulity, even as it tries desperately to sanitize a dirtier truth. This is the hiding in plain sight technique. The biblical author had to explain the historical reality. The fact that in the circulating, unflattering stories about David's house, Tamar had a reputation as a prostitute. They couldn't deny she was one, so they manipulated the story to say she pretended to be one. Tamar was a prostitute. Now let's look at Amnon's counterpart, Judah's son Onan. While he sleeps with Tamar, he spills his seed on the ground. It's depicted as a terrible sin in the context of the Levirate marriage law. But look at it with new eyes. It's an ancient form of birth control, and an incredibly prudent one if you are a royal heir having sex with a prostitute. Import that back into the 2 Samuel account. Amnon did not spill his seed like he was supposed to, and he got a prostitute pregnant, a foolish dynastic blunder. The author gives us a reason Amnon was known as a fool. He raped his stepsister. A moral tale. The true reason? He got a sex worker pregnant with a potential royal heir. And it's not entirely clear that Amnon wasn't in love with Tamar. This may explain why the biblical author tells us the opposite, that he hated her after they had sex. It may explain why the author has to explain Tamar's ornate robe, the same type of robe that Joseph was given by his father. If given to her by Amnon, it would have elevated her status. If Tamar had a son, that son would eventually be king. David would not have been thrilled. Amnon needed to be eliminated to clear the way for a different heir. Enter Absalom. But let's talk about Absalom. If you haven't guessed already, Absalom was not actually David's son either. That's another invention of the biblical author. There are a lot of reasons for thinking this, and the story of Absalom really deserves its own video. But once again, we are tipped off by the emphasis of the biblical author. Just like Tamar's kinship, the intense, repetitive insistence on Absalom's relationship to the king is suspect. The narrator, Absalom, and David himself repeatedly tell us that they are father and son. It's one of the strongest emphasis that I've seen in the Bible. Here's just a snippet from 2 Samuel. My son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Absalom, my son, my son. The biblical author is over the top. The emphasis is overwhelming. Absalom was not David's son. That relationship is an invention designed to complicate the narrative and distract from what really happened. So why did Absalom really kill Amnon? Dr. Kip Davis and Dr. Joel Baden point to the cracks in the narrative, suggesting that David may have been complicit in the murder. I say it was more than complicity. He ordered the killing. Look at Absalom's cryptic statement to his men. Do not fear, have I not commanded you myself? The author wants the reader to nod and say, yes, Absalom ordered the murder of his brother. But questions like this often signal the opposite of the stated answer. David had a motive, and after peering behind the smokescreen, we now know what that motive was. Amnon created a bastard royal heir. But here is the real plot twist, and the true horror of the Davidic dynasty. Absalom killed all of David's sons. The author had to explain this away quickly. In 2 Samuel 13, a report comes to David. Absalom had struck and killed all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. And who swoops in to clean up the story? Jonadab, David's nephew, who immediately corrects the report. Let my lord not assume that they have put to death all the young men, the king's sons, for only Amnon is dead. A quick, convenient correction. A total fabrication. With all of David's legitimate, recognized sons dead, who is now the heir? That's right, the prostitute's son. Dr. Kip Davis observed the lack of children for Tamar in 2 Samuel. The author surgically removed her son from that narrative. But the son was a historical reality, and he couldn't be destroyed. He had to be injected somewhere else into the grand narrative. Somewhere within the tribe of Judah, where he could still be placed within the Davidic line. And where did they hide him? In Genesis 38, which most scholars agree is a later insertion into the surrounding Genesis narrative. The son of the prostitute, begotten by a royal heir, is now Perez, one of the twins of Tamar and Judah. And to ensure that the line of David was secured through the correct twin, the author had to invent the dramatic scene of the scarlet thread that marked Zerah, only for Perez to breach the order and claim the birthright. The Davidic ancestral line comes directly from the twin who tore the script. The biblical authors were trying to manage a piece of history that was already widely known and frankly wildly popular. The story of the prostitute who became an ancestress of the royal line. A prostitute to princess narrative is the kind of salacious, dramatic, and ultimately triumphant tale that spreads like a wildfire among the people. They couldn't simply erase it. Instead, they had to sanitize it, transforming a scandalous affair into a story of righteous, if unconventional, action. This is precisely the kind of historical cleanup operation we saw in the Jezebel narrative, where the author desperately tries to cover up an inconvenient truth with an elaborate, almost believable lie. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe.